Got good and bad news for you. Your riffs are too complicated. Nobody likes them. I know this is hard to hear, but the answer is actually pretty easy. Just make them simpler. Duh. This is not advice if you play prog metal or thrash metal or anything like that. The point of those riffs is to be complicated. And people who listen to that music like that kind of thing. But if you're trying to write catchy songs that appeal to a lot of people, then a simple riff is a great way to go. I'm not putting down complicated riffs. There are many great complicated riffs, and I love Johnny Marr just as much as the next person. But I want to show you that with just 3 notes or 3 chords or 1 chord that you can write a great riff that'll be catchy and will hook the listener. So if you're tired of playing to empty rooms where the only people who are watching are people who are too drunk to leave, and you would rather fill up the dance floor with slightly intoxicated people who are staying of their own volition, then just keep it simple. Stop with the complicated riffs that have more notes than a beaver's dam. And so in this video, I'm going to walk you through famous examples of very simple riffs, and then I'll show you how to write simple riffs so you keep people from walking out the door and going to watch The Office reruns for the millionth time instead of watching your band. All right, I'm playing this SG through a Friedman Little Sister. And for overdrive, I have a JHS color box. All right, so first simple riff example, it's just 1 chord. That's all it is. It's easy. That's it. This is the whole riff. So that was All My Life off the Foo Fighters 1 by 1 album. It came out in 2002. And all it is, it's a G power chord. It's just a G power chord. And it's just the same rhythm over and over again. So they use that as a continual motif throughout the song, and they keep coming back to that. And they even do at the end, I think maybe what you would call like the bridge, they return to that riff, but then they just make it a lot louder. Really what they're doing there is just creating an interesting rhythm with just the 1 chord. So the chord starts off on the 1, but then it plays, and that starts on the and of 2, and then again on the and of 4. So 1. So when it just does that over and over again, and that's it. It's just, all right, so the next riff I'm going to show you is, it's just 2 notes. So that is Vaseline off the Stone Temple Pilots album, Purple. It's just 2 notes. It's an F and a G. And is it the most iconic riff? No. Does it work? Does it serve the song? Is it just the right part that the song needs? And it's just a simple groove, just repeated over and over again. Very simple, not a complicated rhythm or anything like that. And it just serves the song, and it grooves well with the drums, so then the vocals can just have space over top to write a really good melody. The next one is probably one of the most iconic riffs of all time. You'll definitely recognize it from just the first couple notes. It's just 3 notes. It's the 1 and the 2 and the 3 in the minor scale. So it's 1, 2, 3, 2, 1, 2, 3. Very easy. Just D, E, F, E, D, E, F. And that doubles as the vocal melody. So he's singing the same notes in the vocal melody while he's playing them on guitar. So it's just a dead simple riff. One of the most iconic songs of all time. it would be hard to argue that that riff should have more notes in it. Okay, this next riff uses the same 3 scale degrees, but different notes, but it's also the minor key. So you know that's Satisfaction by the Rolling Stones off their album Out of Our Heads. Came out in 1965. And again, it's just the 1, the 2, and the 3 of the minor scale. Nothing complicated. The rhythm in this one's a little bit more sophisticated, but not much. There's some pull-offs. And that again is another one of the most iconic riffs of all time. And it's the same 3 notes as Another Brick in the Wall, just played in a different key. The 1, 2, and the 3. And just played with a different rhythm. And with a cool fuzz tone. Yeah, and the notes are just B, C sharp, D. Again, dead simple riff. As soon as you hear it, you know exactly what it is. All right, this next riff's not quite as iconic as the last 2, but it's still a great riff nonetheless, using only 3 notes. So that is the riff from Devil's Haircut by Beck off his 1996 album Odelay. And that riff, it's just the 1, 1, 4, and the flat 7. And that riff repeats unchanged for over a minute before they do anything else in the song. The guitar comes in and out, but the bass is just playing that riff the whole time, just going. So you hear these 3 notes over and over again for a full minute before anything changes and any new guitar parts come in. And I think it's a good thing to think about. When you have a good song, you can just keep repeating the riff without variation as long as you have like lyrics or other melodies going on over top of it. It's not necessary to change your riff up every 5 seconds to keep people interested. Okay, this next riff has more notes. I think it has 5 notes. So we're pushing it here with the amount of notes we're using, but still a dead simple riff, and it passes the 1 finger test. What is the 1 finger test? Can you play the riff with 1 finger? So obviously that is Come As You Are off Nirvana's 1991 album, Nevermind. And the riff is very simple. It's just an E chord, E minor. So you got an E minor there to a D power chord. And there's kind of there's a chromatic walk up to start that. So you start on the D, go to the F, sorry, D, D sharp, E. So it's really just those 2 chords with a chromatic walk up and down between the 2. So again, super simple. Another iconic riff. There's probably like 3 or 4 songs that have riffs that are very similar to that. All of them fairly popular. So this riff here is sung in stadiums wide. They don't sing the lyrics to the song. They sing the guitar riff in stadiums all over the world. I'm sure you already know what song it is, and I haven't even played yet. It has 1.4 billion plays on Spotify, so here it is. That's almost the entire song. He does one small variation later. But that's pretty much it. And there's a couple chords, but that's almost the entire song. And again, it's sung in stadiums. It's been played billions of times. And obviously you know that is Seven Nation Army by the White Stripes off their 2003 album Elephant. And so that's just an octave pedal on there to get those lower notes. But the riff is in E minor, and it's really just like walking down the scale. Like it goes up and then just down the scale. So it goes 1, 3, 1, 7, 6, 5. And this approach that he uses, where he uses the same riff with the slight variation in the chorus, is a great way to approach it. Maybe you don't have to have your whole song be the riff, but for the verse or the pre-chorus, you could just change it up just a little bit as you go into the pre-chorus, adding like one note or just one slight variation. So the next riff we have is just 2 notes, and then it mixes in some chords. So that is My Sharona by the Knacks off their 1979 album Get the Knack. And the riff is essentially just 2 notes. And what he's doing there is he's just accenting the 2 and the 4. So that's usually what the snare would play, is on the 2 and the 4. And then just adding in the power chord. So he's in G. He's just playing the G octave. C to B flat. And what's really driving this riff is the rhythm. I mean, if you just play those 2 notes, but without any like real rhythm, it would be boring. And it just mixes the use of like single notes and chords, which is another thing to think about when making a riff, is using both single notes and chords. That can be helpful for writing a good riff. All right, next is a song that basically uses the same idea, uses an octave, and has 2 chords, though the main part of the riff is just the octave. And you'll definitely know when you hear it. Definitely one of the most iconic songs in history. So that is obviously Immigrant Song by Led Zeppelin off their 1970 album Led Zeppelin 3. Very creative with their album titles. Again, it's just the same thing as My Sharona. So it's just an octave on the F sharp. And then it goes to an A, E, and then back to the A, and back to the A. And again, he's accenting the 2 and the 4 with that octave right there. But really, it's just the rhythm that's driving that riff. So basically, My Sharona and the Immigrant Song are the same riff, basically. But obviously what differentiates them is they use different rhythms. So, I mean, that's something you can even think about. Just use an octave. And then just try to write a different rhythm to it. And add maybe a chord. And then you have a simple riff right there. This next riff is also going to mix single notes and chords together to create a very simple and iconic riff. You may or may not know this one. So that is Rise Above off of Black Flag's 1981 album Damaged. And this riff was written by Greg Ginn, who's a master of just writing simple punk riffs. But it's super easy. It's basically 3 chords. It's a D major, G major, A major. So with the D major, all he's doing is he's picking the root in the third. So the D and the F sharp. So I thought it was a good example of using single notes and chords to get a catchy riff that you can even use in punk rock music, which is punk rock is full of just like dead simple riffs. Okay, this next riff is a riff everybody learns. It's their first riff. You should already know what it is, but if you don't, here it is. Everybody's first riff. Super iconic, popular riff. I bet you don't even know what the words to the verse or maybe even the chorus is off the top of your head, but you know that riff. So that riff is so catchy that it outshines the entire song. I can't think of what the chorus is. I should know, but I don't. And so that is Smoke on the Water, Deep Purple, off their 1972 album Machine Head. And the riff is in G minor. G blues minor, pentatonic. But instead of playing power chords for the riff, they're playing fourths. So fourths would be, so if you played a power chord and you add the octave, and then you take away the lowest note, you have basically an inversion of a power chord. And so what that is the root G, and then the 5th D, but the D is just the lowest note. And so instead of playing power chords, they just take out the lowest note and go. So it's just kind of a different way of playing a power chord. So the notes there, the chords there are G, B flat, C, and then C sharp, which is like the blue note. And a lot of people, when they first learn it, they'll just learn it with the single notes. Or maybe even on just one string. Which in that version, it passes the 1-finger test. So it's simple enough to play with 1 finger. Okay, this next riff is a good illustration of how to use chords to create a riff. So there's no single notes, it's all chords, and it's just using the rhythm to create an interesting riff. So that is Semi-Charmed Life off Third Eye Blind's 1997 self-titled album. And it's just 3 chords. You got a G major, D major, to a D sus4 for just a second. So maybe 4 chords. Then to a C major. So that's just a 1-5-4 chord progression. G, D, C. So it's just simple G major, but it's how he adds that rhythmic element to it that just makes it a riff that stands out, and you know exactly what song it is, even though you've heard these. Those chords are in a million different songs, but when you hear that riff, you know exactly what song it is. But if you just play, you have no idea what song that is. That could be a million different songs. Part of what makes it stand out is adding that G to the D chord, which makes it a sus4 chord, but you're only doing it for a second. He's not playing. So it's those tiny details that give a little bit of flair to your riffs that you can add in there that just give it a more unique character and have it stand out more. Here's another example of a song that uses 3 chords to create a memorable riff. So, really easy. It's all power chords. And obviously know that is American Idiot off of Green Day's album of the same name. It's in A-flat mixolydian. And it's, you know that because it's got the flat 7. So here's the 1. Flat 7. So again, it's just the rhythm of how this one's more the rhythm of how he's changing the chords and less of the rhythm how he's playing each individual chord. Like in Semi-Charmed Kind of Life, he was just playing the different rhythms, but he's going back and forth. And then at the end there, he's doing this like every so often where he just hits a bunch of open strings, which is another like small detail that kind of gives it a unique character, and it's really like kind of punk rock thing to do is just hit a bunch of notes. None of those notes are even in the key. None of these open strings. So it just gives that bit of extra character, of that I don't give a shit sort of attitude that you can get with punk rock. Okay, so we could do this all day. We could go through riff after riff after riff. If you go through the history of music, it's the amount of 3-note, 4-note riffs that are simple to play that you could play with one finger or are 3 chords, it's endless. What I want to do is kind of go over what you can do to write simple riffs. And I think that people are going to go, oh, well, it's just easy. It's simple. It should be easier to write a simple riff than it is to write a complicated riff. But I don't think that is true. Because a simple riff has nothing to hide behind. Every single note has to be great, and it has to be the most rhythmically good choice that you can make. So you can get away with a lot of just like... You're just using a bunch of notes. You can kind of hide the fact that you're not looking at the rhythmic element of it. And so that's going to be at the center of this. And one thing I want to emphasize before we go into that is that ultimately this is about songwriting and not about riff writing. None of those riffs, almost none of those riffs would work without a good song behind it. So if you could write the most amazing, catchy riff ever, but if the rest of the song sucks, people aren't going to like it. So I think that's something to think about when writing riffs, is that it's about the song. I mean, like when we played that Vaseline riff. Not nearly as iconic as many of the riffs on there, but it served the song and it works really well. Another thing that simple riffs do is they give space to the singer and more freedom with their melody. The more notes you're playing, the more you're going to lock the singer into specific rhythmic and melodic structures that they have to go into to fit your riff. So when you have a simple riff, you leave a lot more melodic space for the singer to do their thing. Another thing I want to point out is that constraints on your creativity, like saying, I'm going to write a riff with just 3 notes or 4 notes, or I'm going to write a riff with 2 chords. These constraints actually help you come up with more creative ideas. I think it's a popular misconception that the less constraints you have, the more creative you can be. And obviously there's going to be diminishing returns. You know, if I say you can play 1 note and you can only play quarter notes, you're going to be pretty limited. There's a space somewhere in where locking yourself in with constraints is going to give you the ability to be more creative. And so part of that is you get to choose the constraints that you want to use. So for one song, it could be like, okay, I'm going to write a song and I'm going to write a riff and I'm only going to use 3 notes. That's up to you. You can create whatever constraints you want, but those constraints ultimately will give you the opportunity to be more creative. Another thing you might notice that almost all the riffs that we went over were either in the minor the Mixolydian, or the minor pentatonic. There were some in the major key, but I think that's a good place to start. I think those are scales that it's easier to write riffs in. That's not to say that you can't use the major scale or major pentatonic or any other scale. A good place to start is the pentatonic scale because there are fewer note choices anyways. All right, so now that you've set your constraints, so whether it's 3 chords or 3 notes, for my example, I'm going to use just 3 notes. Another thing you want to do is play to a drum loop or a metronome. This is going to give you something to groove off of. It's going to give you the background to make more rhythmic choices. I like to use a metronome because it'll give you that steady beat, but it gives you a little bit more freedom. But you might want to use a drum loop and just try to write a simple 3-note riff that matches the drums that you already have. Either way works. I mean, I do it both ways. And so really what you're going to do is you're just going to keep playing. You're going to play with the rhythm until you get something that you just like kind of makes you move your head, something you want to hear over and over again. So I made a track. I'm going to play it and show you the riff that I made. Okay, so that was my riff. Super easy. Dead simple. Totally unimpressive. But one thing you'll notice is I used variations of the exact same riff. So it started off. And I left off the beat. I left off the end of the riff. It's the first time or two. And then after I played the riff a couple times, I added in another variation. And just turn that from just single notes into power chords. So that's a good way to get more mileage out of your riff. And obviously that was a very short example. I would extend that much longer if there were lyrics or anything like that, but I'm trying to not bore you with just playing the same thing over and over again without any variations. But I think ultimately what it comes down to is great riffs are great riffs because they're attached to great songs. So if you want to write great riffs, you also have to write great songs. It's way beyond the scope of this video to go into any of that. If you want to hear more about that, I have videos breaking down some songwriting, and you can check those out. So if you enjoyed this video, if you could like and subscribe, that would be great. And if you want to, you can leave a comment down below telling me your favorite simple riff.